Broadcasting from the heart of the nation, the next generation in conservative talk radio. This is the Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
Why, yes it is. What is up, my friends? Welcome into it. Happy pre-Friday celebration, the greatest day of the entire week. You are looking forward to the end of the week. We are going into, I would say, pre-holiday weekend with Independence Day 1 week from tomorrow. That's absolutely insane. Cannot believe that we are that far into the year already. Blows my mind. Makes my brain hurt just a little bit, but that's all right. That's how we cruise through a 2025. So great to have you. There is a lot to talk about today that's also going to make your brain hurt, so strap in and buckle up. We will cover all of it the best that we possibly can throughout the program. Bottom of the hour, Thomas D Lorenzo will be on the show. He's with the Mises Institute. We'll talk about the economy, a potential recession, inflation, business growth, and so much more. Are we on the brink of a recession in 2025? I don't know how we can still say that, but we'll get to that and talk with Thomas about it here in just a little bit. First and foremost, welcome into the program. Great to have you as we do our thing each and every day.
Do it live!
Right here on the show. If you want to find more of the program, by the way, you are more than welcome to do so. HoosierReason.com, HOOSER Reason.com. You can find our website, find a link to all of our social media, find our podcast, our streaming sites, all of our great radio affiliates, which we have more coming on both for our weekend syndicated show and for the weekday program as well, which is really cool and exciting. So welcome aboard. We'll have some announcement on that here first. Okay, do we want the good news or the bad news first today? I'm usually a guy that's a glass half full, like pure optimism kind of guy. So hold on here. As we swing across the studio and grab my papers, I want to start maybe with the negativity of the day, the bad news of the day, because I want to wrap up on a positive note. As you know, we are the eternal optimists on this show, so let's get into what's trending here, shall we?
What's trending today?
All right, so here's the scoop of the day, and I really want to go into a bit of the weeds here. I don't know how this will portray over the radio, but by golly, we'll do our darndest to keep it somewhat entertaining. But I really want you to understand how deeply ingrained politics plays into the policy that goes on in Washington, D.C. The legislation that they discuss on how the politics can interrupt it, can fast-track it, can allow it to go, can not allow it to go. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of bills that are put up, introduced in committees, in subcommittees, on the floors of the House, floors of the Senate, that never go anywhere. Because you, number one, have to get a lot of people to get on board with them. You have to have the willpower. And at the end of the day, you really have to have the heads of both chambers agree to even allow them to go onto the floors, or even allow them to go into the committees, or even allow them to go into the subcommittees in order to have a conversation about them. And it's very difficult to do. Most bills do not go above the line, meaning up to the floor of the Senate or the House, in order to get voted on. It's very difficult to do so. And a lot of it is based on the quote-unquote policies and the rules that Congress has set forth for us to debate certain pieces of legislation. That leads us to the what's trending story of the day with the one big beautiful bill.
What's trending today?
Now, I don't know if you've heard the news or not today, but it may be held up slightly in the Senate, with the Senate supposedly, or at least they were going to vote on it, tomorrow, on Friday, to wrap up the week. The goal is still to have it on the president's desk by Friday next week on 4th of July. Whether that happens or not now, I'm not sure. It could be delayed. We don't know what's going to happen because of a ruling from the Parliamentarian. Now, for those that don't know, the Parliamentarian, nonpartisan, and I say that in air quotes, just like judges in the country, they're nonpartisan, but we say that in air quotes because we know that they have a political agenda, which is why Democrats openly acknowledge that most federal judges that they've appointed over the past year were there with a specific duty to red tape, to slow down, to pause, and to challenge just about every single Donald Trump administration policy that he was going to advocate for, because they did not want him to advance his agenda. And while they try to play this off as some type of rule sneakiness, as like it's abridging the rules, the Parliamentarian not allowing it in the reconciliation bill, this is political. And it's very evident, it's very obvious, and here's why. For those that don't know, the headline today shows that according to the Parliamentarian of the Senate, they have blocked certain measures of the reforms in the Medicaid program that will be in the One Big Beautiful Bill, a.k.a. the rescission package, working through the U.S. Senate. As they say, that it violates the rules of what a rescission bill within the Senate laws or Senate rules are allowed to do because of what a rescission bill is only allowed to do in the U.S. Senate. According to NPR, they say the Medicaid provisions have been among some of the most complicated provisions that were negotiated in the bill, mostly among Republicans trying to figure out what to do with them. As you know, Senator Josh Hawley from the state of Missouri, very adamant, don't change Medicaid, which is really cutting back the federal reimbursements to the states that have expanded this program, with the whole plan, as you know, has been to cut the Medicaid accessibility to illegal aliens. Kind of weird how we're paying for someone to be here illegally through a government health care program. And two, cutting out those that are able-bodied working class Americans that are able to go and work, but yet are just maybe low income that are going to get government health care. Again, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that was the expansion of Obamacare. Now, that being said, at the same time, by the way, it also, based on the plan in the compromise and negotiations in the Senate, it bars gender-affirming care within it through Planned Parenthood or other different programs, and it bans that from being covered under the Medicaid program. That sounds relatively common sense, right? Now, according to the negotiated plan that's going through the Senate that was planned on being voted on tomorrow, they say the directive states the state cuts the tax on imposed by Medicare provisions from 6 to 3%, meaning that the states would not get reimbursed for all of it. In fact, they would only get reimbursed about half of what they normally would be, from 6% down to 3%, effectively halving that amount that states would receive in tax revenue from those providers. Critics also say the change will result in major challenges for rural hospitals that rely on that money because it becomes part of the big plan on tax revenue for states and yada, yada, yada about complicated tax formulas. Other provisions were flagged by the parliamentarian, including one barring Medicaid from covering gender-affirming care and denying coverage to some Medicaid recipients who are non-U.S. citizens. All of it's kind of weird. Now, why did they bar it? That's the big question, right? And I want you to understand how these rules are made in the Senate for the parliamentarian to come out with this, and is it legitimate that it violates the rules in the Senate for a reconciliation bill, or is this politics? And here's why it's politics. They're using the rules under the quote-unquote Byrd rule on saying what can be allowed and not allowed in a reconciliation bill, especially in the U.S. Senate. The Byrd rule, ironically, is put up by former Senator Robert Byrd, which Robert Byrd was a KKK member, by the way, a staunch Democrat, a former KKK member when he joined back in 1941. And when he passed, all the Democrats, including Joe Biden, including Nancy Pelosi, including Hillary Clinton, all these are, he's such a great guy. He was a racist, radical nutjob Democrat that created these rules. And for some reason, we still abide by them. Nonetheless, the reconciliation bill obviously allows us to, for a budget or a tax bill or a spending bill, allows us to avoid the filibuster 60-vote majority in there and allows us to have a simple majority of 51 votes. Under the Byrd rule, which is why the parliamentarian says that we cannot include these provisions for the Medicaid reform program in this one big, beautiful bill, says, here are the different limitations, that the Byrd rule for a reconciliation bill in the Senate prevents the inclusion of provisions that are not considered quote-unquote budgetary in nature, so it can't be part of an actual federal budget. It includes provisions that don't directly affect spending, revenue, or the debt limit. And the Byrd rule also prohibits provisions that would increase the deficit beyond the budget window that's usually about a 10-year window out. If you remember, I don't know, about a week ago, we asked a guest on here why, when we passed the Trump tax cuts the first time, why we didn't permanentize them and why we're having to do it now. And they had made the comment that it was part of the Byrd rule where we couldn't permanentize a tax change because we didn't know what the impact would be 10 years out, and you could not create a deficit 10 years out because the rest of the budget wasn't outlooked at that time. We are codifying and we are trying to permanentize them in this bill this time. But these restrictions are very vague. I mean, if you have anything, you cannot include a provision that directly affects spending, revenue, or the debt limit, or has anything considered quote-unquote budgetary in nature. That's everything that's in the bill. If we're spending on immigration and border funding, that would be part of spending of the federal government. If you're cutting taxes in a reconciliation bill, that would be considered revenue or lack thereof revenue for the federal government. If you cut taxes and you don't cut spending as well, that would also include raising the debt ceiling or the debt limit of how much debt we can have in the budget or this reconciliation bill. All of that is included. So what's the point of a reconciliation bill in the first place? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, that being said, let's relate it back to Medicaid. In order for us to cut the near $5 trillion in the tax revenue because of tax cuts, knowing that it will grow the economy down the road, GDP growth, we're going to codify the Trump tax cuts, we're going to allow people to actually keep their own money, that's going to allow people to start businesses or pay off debt or spend it more as a consumer, which is going to grow the GDP and sales tax. You know how it works. That all affects the economy. But the immediate shows that we could see a near $5 trillion increase in the debt or the deficit overall because we have $5 trillion less in government revenue coming in. So we have to offset that. Some of it's already coming in from tariffs and trade negotiations and things that the Trump administration's doing, but we have to find a way to reform. One of those ways that we're going to reform is reforming the Medicaid program, how much we're reimbursing states for their statewide health care and Medicaid programs at a state level. Barack Obama himself said very clearly when he expanded Obamacare, which was essentially this Medicaid expansion that we're seeing now, including non-citizens on here and including individuals that are able-bodied and young that are just low income but are not elderly and are not disabled, which was the entire purpose of the program in the first place. Barack Obama openly said that the sustaining of reimbursing states at a 90% level was completely unfeasible and would not last forever. We're to that point. It's completely unfeasible and we cannot do it long-term any longer. And while we're trying to grow the economy, get our spending under control, and do minor reforms in social programs that are bankrupting this nation across the board, with Social Security, with Medicare and Medicaid, with the food stamps and SNAP program, all of them consist of near 80% of the entire federal budget and are bankrupting this nation when we're spending $7 trillion a year. That's about $3 trillion over what we can sustain. I mean, it's not that hard. It's not that hard to understand. So all we're doing with Medicaid is saying we're not going to cover gender-affirming care, a.k.a. trying to pretend that you're something else and then doing physical mutilation of humans and having that covered by your taxpayer money through a government program. We're going to stop that. If you're a non-citizen, illegal, or here is just a visa or a visitor or a work visa or student visa, you don't need to be on government programs because you're here as a guest and we're not going to fund you and take care of you for being a non-citizen. Doesn't make any sense. And we're going to put work requirements on. If you are going to be on here, then if you're able-bodied and you're not elderly or disabled, you need to show proof of work requirements that you're applying for jobs, that you're doing some sort of job and doing a basic job in order to contribute a little bit to the program that you're mooching off of and leeching off of as a socialized program. That's all we're doing. That's all we're reforming. And the parliamentarian for the Senate said, not going to happen. We're not allowed to do this. John Thune, the majority leader for the Senate right now for the Republicans, was caught in the hallway today and said this regarding the issue.
What about this division that's getting shot up?
Well,
Does that make it more difficult?
everything is challenging, but they're all speed bumps, and we have contingency plans, Plan B.
We have contingency plans, Plan A, Plan B, and it's a road bump, but we still are on track. Hopefully, they say they want to still vote on this as of tomorrow based on what they can do to manipulate a little bit and to appease this parliamentarian. But remember, this is not just a legal issue. This is a political move to sabotage this bill.
Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier. When reason meets radio. This is the Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
We have contingency plans, Plan B and Plan C.
Is where we procedural vote still tomorrow?
We'll continue to litigate it. We'll see. I mean, we don't control the timing of the parliamentarian. That's obviously something that we have to adapt to. But we're plowing forward, and when we actually get on, it still is an open question. But rest assured we will.
And there we go. So Senate Majority Leader John Thune speaking regarding the parliamentarian and the U.S. Senate that is obstructing the Medicaid reforms that they want to try and save a little bit of cash, to have a balanced budget, to abide by the Byrd rules that we have in the Senate for a reconciliation bill that doesn't address necessarily budgetary issues, but keeps the debt within the debt limit for the next 10-year outlook, which is with the tax cuts and then offsetting it by some of these cuts and punting things back down to a statewide level, which would be kind of common sense on that front. So if you look at it by the guidelines that we have from the quote-unquote Byrd rule, then really we should never have to do reconciliation bills at all, because everything it says, you can't have anything considered budgetary in nature. That's, I would think, spending, and that would be taxes, and that would be whatever. So in other words, you can't have consistent, we're going to pay you every single year. This is like a one-time boom, one-time hit, which is what we're doing because it can't be quote-unquote budgetary. Okay, cool. If we do this reform on Medicaid, that would affect it long-term. Yes, I get that, but everything else we're doing is affecting long-term as well. So I don't know what we're talking about here. This is very political, and it's unfortunate. Democrats have openly acknowledged that they are fighting quote-unquote like hell to stop this one big, beautiful bill. And just like how they've weaponized the judicial system and federal judges and the court system around the country to stop the Trump administration for what they want to advocate for their policies, this is the same thing. This is the BS that you have to deal with in government, what you have to deal with from the legal side to say, yes, you're allowed to even vote on it, and this is what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And it's absolute, quote-unquote, as Joe Biden would say, malarkey. And it's unfortunate because this has some majorly good things in this bill. And thank God for John Thune when he was sitting on the Senate floor talking about this, what we could see with tax breaks, growing the economy and giving tax relief for Americans.
Congress fails to act, a typical family will face a $1,700 tax hike. A typical family in South Dakota will face a $2,500 tax hike. Republicans are determined to make sure that that doesn't happen. And later this week, we'll consider our reconciliation bill that will prevent that tax hike by extending the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I say extend, Mr. President, but we're doing a lot more than just extending the 2017 tax cuts. We're making them permanent.
And I'm okay with that. And that's what we have to do, along with Trump tax cuts, by the way, 2.0, that we're working on. Now, we'll see if that slows it down. According to John Thune, they are still hopefully on track to do the big vote on the floor tomorrow, giving a week for the House to look at it, review it. And Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has said to put your vacation plans on hold for the House members because you may be voting on that one big, beautiful bill after the revised version sometime next week to get it to the president, with that goal still to have it by the 4th of July.
What's trending today?
Politics, man. I tell you, it's extremely frustrating because we can't get anything done in a proper manner because there's always that legality of someone throwing in that wrench in the system, that red tape. And that is why it's been difficult for us to steer the ship, to do anything different, to change anything. And that's why Democrats and progressives and the elites and the establishment, or the deep state, or whatever you want to call them, are so frustrated with Donald Trump, because Trump don't care. Daddy Trump, he's back in the White House now after his NATO visit, and Daddy Trump, he just throws the wrench in the system, and he don't care. And we have to get back to that point. Not to say we need anarchy in D.C., but by golly, these rules are stupid on what they're allowed and not allowed to do. When we come back around the corner, we're going to talk with Thomas D Lorenzo. He's with the Mises Institute. We're going to talk about the economy, but I also tease that we have some good news. And after being frustrated with the politics being played in the Senate right now, we need to look at some positive news. And there was a major decision coming out of the Supreme Court as they start to drop their load, so to speak. They drop the bombshells across all of us at the end of June, usually going into July. They go into their summer break. They're like, here's all of our opinions on all the cases we've been holding on to. Have a great summer. They're starting to do that, and it was a big win for us and a big hit for Democrats. We'll cover some of that when we come back right around the corner for your pre-Friday celebration. Hang tight.
This is the Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier. Truth, reason, and common sense. This is the Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
So angry.
That scene playing out moments ago, demonstrators protesting the big, beautiful bill being arrested on Capitol Hill. The video shows protesters being removed by U.S. Capitol Police. Police have cleared the protesters out of the Capitol building. But we'll keep an eye on this just in case anything else shakes out.
Oh, my. So that was a headline from Fox News earlier today. So the protests going on with one big, beautiful bill. How dare you reform Medicaid to not allow non-citizens or gender-affirming care to take place on government-run healthcare systems? How dare you do something like that? We are all, what?
We're all going to die because of you!
That's the way it is. Welcome back into the program. By the way, that one big, beautiful bill, hopefully, if we can get past this hurdle from the parliamentarian, we can get that vote in the Senate tomorrow. We can get it through the House in early next week and have it on the president's desk by 4th of July, 1 week from tomorrow. I am still optimistic that's going to happen, and that's where our friends with Americans for Prosperity come in. You can go to protectprosperity.com, get all the information, where we're at with this process and how you can be a part of it, what phone calls you can make with elected officials, and how you can make sure the word gets out there, while the other ones are so angry about it with the other side, causing an insurrection of the Capitol grounds. Did I say that right? Wait a second. Did I say that? I'm sorry. And having to be escorted out by law enforcement, like illegally protesting in the Capitol building, aka an insurrection. Oh my. You can go to protectprosperity.com and do something productive. All right, speaking of, let's get into our What's Trending story of the day. What do you say?
What's trending today?
To talk about that, the economy, where things are at right now, and some good news, hopefully, going on in the nation economically. Really happy to have on the program from the Mises Institute. Really happy to have on here the man himself, Thomas D Lorenzo. Thomas, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. I am excited to chat about the economy and where we're at. There is still a fear right now that we are going to go into a recession, that the economy is slowing down, consumer confidence is on the decline. Thomas, is that really happening right now?
Well, that's always a nebulous thing, consumer confidence. That's based on surveys, and you know what people say and what they do is often very different. And I think one thing that would help, President Trump never did finish up what he was doing with tariffs. And most business people will tell you, just tell us what the tariff tax rate is going to be, so we can plan for next year and the year after. And there's not a big protest against what he's doing, but they want the certainty. And uncertainty is a bad thing for the economy because a lot of businesses sit on their hands in terms of investment when they're so uncertain about what everything is going to cost next year. Yeah, so that's one thing. Then, of course, the war in the Middle East and that's additional uncertainty. Will the Strait of Hormuz be shut down? What's going to happen? And that's beginning to clarify, it seems to me anyway, also. And so I think as soon as those two things are taken care of, and I hope they're taken care of in a good way, I think the economy will start humming again because President Trump is, he's working on deregulating and cutting taxes, and that's what needs to happen.
Sure. The good news is, according to the
Congress, there's one over that.
Yeah, according to CNBC, there was a story that ran actually today, I believe, that said because of the ceasefire that's at least ongoing right now between Israel and Iran, that people are feeling more confident with the economy. That the oil prices went down a little bit for whatever reason with that ceasefire. Maybe things just people getting along a little bit better. But there was a kind of a reinvestment into the stock market with this ongoing ceasefire. So it seems like right now it's actually helping us, isn't it?
Well, sure it is. War is the enemy of prosperity. We divert billions and billions of resources away from our economy to war, which is all about blowing things up and that sort of thing. And so, and of course, nothing creates isolationism more than being at war with somebody. Yeah. And wouldn't it be nice if we could trade more peacefully and mutually beneficial with more countries in the Middle East than as opposed to sending more bombs and fighter jets over there, send them American products instead.
Sure.
And that's what we all want to see, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about for just a moment the one big beautiful bill that is working through the Senate. Obviously, a potential slowdown or at least a snag with the parliamentarian saying we can't reform Medicaid in this for whatever reason to try and offset some of the tax cuts. We'll see if that actually slows down the process or not. But let's just say we get this through and we have this near $5 trillion in tax cuts, codifying Trump tax cuts 1.0, working on Trump tax cuts 2.0 with the no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security, writing off if you purchase an American vehicle on your taxes or whatever else that he wants to try to include in some of these. Will this help the economy start cranking along as well? And you mentioned that consistency. If we are able to continue on with the tax cuts that expire at the end of this year, I would think that would bring more stability to the private market, wouldn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, putting more money in the pockets of the private sector is always a good idea. And you don't need to abolish the IRS or cut the income tax rate by 2/3 or anything like that. Historically speaking, the types of things President Trump is talking about in terms of tax cuts have always had given a good boost to the economy, and we need more of that. We need much more of that, and I hope he keeps going and gives us much more of that.
Yeah,
because that's what fuels the economy is the private sector and cutting back on the government.
Yeah,
and a good example of how the bureaucracy really is our enemy. They're not our public servants; they're our enemy. Is this woman who wants to hold up the bill by saying, "No, you can't not give illegal aliens Medicaid." Who is she? I mean, who is this person?
That's it. It's so weird. I mean, they're trying to say that there's so many restrictions on a reconciliation bill through the quote-unquote Byrd rules, but yet everything that's in there affects the budget in some fashion or affects the debt in some fashion, which they say in a reconciliation bill you can't touch those. So everything in there affects that. Why is it that we're picking out specifically these Medicaid reforms of making sure that you're a U.S. citizen, we're not going to supply it to non-U.S. citizens, we're going to ban gender-affirming care, and we're going to make sure that you have some kind of work requirements? Like, why is that the controversial part that the parliamentarian all of a sudden said, no, you're not allowed to include in this bill?
Yeah, well, it's the same reason why they oppose deporting rapists and other criminals who are illegal aliens, is that the whole campaign, the presidential campaign on the Democrat side, was based on flooding the country with millions of illegal aliens who they would register to vote illegally, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that has always been their strategy, and it still is. You see it every day in the news, is no matter how ridiculous it seems, they'll defend deporting some criminal who's a criminal when he crossed the border to begin with,
right?
Because he did it illegally, and then he comes here and commits crimes, and they're defending that. But it's all about votes, as always. That's their whole game plan.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. We're talking with Thomas D Lorenzo. He's with the Mises Institute as we talk about the economy, the one big beautiful bill, and more. Let's talk about inflation for just a moment. There is a headline that said inflation could be rising by the end of the year, which is very strange. We saw a near 30% increase of inflation over the 4-year period of Joe Biden. For the first time in 4 years, in the first quarter of the Trump administration, we've seen inflation go down. Now, it was like 0.2%, but it was down nonetheless for the first time in a 4-year period. Why are we anticipating an increase of inflation for the next few months?
Well, I'm not sure we are anticipating that. That's just some anonymous journalist who throws that out, and they have something to talk about all day, like we're doing. But you would think that the logic would be, well, we saw a reduction in inflation in the past several months, and so maybe that's the trend we're on. But no, we're on the opposite trend, higher inflation, and so. The banking system would be speaking to that. They would be raising interest rates. There's something called the inflation premium. When you lend somebody money, you don't want to be paid back in inflated dollars that have lower purchasing power. So that's one ingredient of interest rates is that. And I haven't seen any big boost because of that, because of this news about so-called inflation increase. And so, and these people are not fortune tellers or mystics, after all. A lot of economists pretend to be, but they're not.
Yeah, they definitely try to be, for sure. That leads to the Federal Reserve. I know Donald Trump's been calling for a lowering of the interest rates in the nation, and the Fed has not done so as of right now. Do you think it is time to lower interest rates in the country?
Well, I think it's really I think it's an absurdity that we have one man or a dozen people who influence the price of anything, especially the price of money.
Yeah.
Of what's with interest rates, and so that has to change. I think whether President Trump likes it or not, I think we used to criticize the Soviet Union for this sort of thing of the government setting the prices of things, but that's what the Fed does. They need to leave it up to the free market, supply and demand for credit, to determine what interest rates should be, instead of some sort of a dictate from the chairman of the Fed. I mean, think of how ridiculous this is. The whole world sits on pins and needles waiting for the latest announcement from this one guy who's like the Wizard of Oz in Washington, D.C., like the Fed chairman. And, what a system that is.
Yeah, what a weird process.
Socialism.
It's a very weird process to think that we allowed something like that, for sure. Thomas, we got just about a minute before we have to take a break here, but is it time? I know it's been a call for it before, more of the quote-unquote libertarians and the quote-unquote radicals in the nation, but there has been calls to end the Fed and get rid of it altogether. Is it time that we have that conversation in a little bit more serious manner?
Well, sure, it's long past time, and we don't have to end the Fed immediately, for example. We could just pass a law that says that the Fed can no longer monetize the debt. That means it can no longer buy short-term government bonds by printing up counterfeit money and buying the bonds. That's how it infuses money into the economy, and that's why we should be having deflation now. Prices should be going down by 3, 5, 10%.
Yeah, that's a great
because
point.
of all the technology we have.
Yeah, I tell you what, Thomas,
that is the reason why we don't.
Yeah, hang on the line. We got to take a hard break here. It's Thomas D Lorenzo with the Mises Institute. We'll continue this when we come back around the corner for your pre-Friday celebration right here on The Voice of Reason. Stay here.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier. America's safe space for common sense. This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
My observation of him is he really doesn't really like strong women. Right. He likes dutiful, obedient women who compliment him, I find. Even back in the day when I used to do jokes about his hair, but every male comedian did jokes about his hair, but he went after me in particular.
Yeah, okay, so that was on The View yesterday. I believe Donald Trump, he doesn't like strong women. It reminds me of the South Park episode of Strong Woman, if you remember that one. If you watch South Park, highly recommend it. That'd be hilarious. But, okay, so he doesn't like strong women. So he has Pam Bondi as the Attorney General for the nation. He has Tulsi Gabbard for the Department of National Intelligence in there. He has Brooke Rollins as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He has so many different women in leadership. Caroline Leavitt. If you try to cross Caroline Leavitt, that would not turn out very well for you. That would not. I would say all of them are very strong women, and they respect him, and he respects them, which is why they work for him and why they do what they do working for his policy. So that's just hilarious. But we don't respect progressive feminist women that just think everybody's evil and Donald Trump's an absolute Satan. We don't do that. We don't work with those individuals. Whatever. It's ridiculous. Speaking of, we did say that there was some good news today, and the good news is the Supreme Court has come out and made a decision regarding a case saying that states are allowed to defund Planned Parenthood through their statewide programs.
Say what?
I know. This one coming originally from South Carolina, but as you know, now that South Carolina got the win, other states are going to do the same thing as well. We can start showing where our taxpayer money is going, and it's not going to go towards, I don't know, organizations that don't need government funding to do things that morally we don't want our tax money going towards, which would be a major win for us. Talk about some of that. We still have Thomas D Lorenzo on the program, the Mises Institute, as we talk about the economy and some of the decisions going on in D.C. Thomas, I know that right now we're about ready to go through this major dump of cases from the Supreme Court, which we always get to look forward to right about this time every single year. That's a big win, I think, for states, right? Deciding where their tax money is going to go.
Well, yeah, and again, it's sort of absurd, isn't it, that they need to ask permission of 5 government lawyers with lifetime tenure if the people in South Carolina can spend their money, the way they want to spend it. And that's something else that has to change. I think states like South Carolina need to start nullifying again and saying, what's the constitutional authority for not allowing us to spend our money, our tax dollars, in the ways we've decided in our democracy here in South Carolina. And that has to change. And it wasn't always like that in America. When Andrew Jackson was president, and John Marshall, who was the Chief Justice, issued a statement that the Bank of the United States, which was the precursor of the Fed, was constitutional. President Andrew Jackson essentially said, well, thank you for your opinion, but my opinion is different, and I'm the president.
Yeah.
And that was that. And he defunded the Bank of the United States, Andrew Jackson did. And that was our system until about the Civil War era. And then after that, the Supreme Court became a sort of a monopoly interpreter of constitutional issues.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We've essentially given them a lot of power, way more power than what they should, because every decision that we're allowed to make apparently hinges on not only the Supreme Court, but also apparently these federal judges. A random federal judge in California can say that Donald Trump is the president of the United States, is not allowed to do something. That's a little weird to me, Thomas.
Yeah, these are people who basically went to law school for a few years and decided they wanted to be Democrat Party political hacks, and they got appointed to a judgeship. And I don't know if you saw on the internet over the past, during the Biden administration, some of the judges that were recommended by Biden to the federal judiciary couldn't seem to understand law school 101 questions given to them by some of the Republican senators. But that's because, in my opinion, these are people who wanted to be political activists, and they thought, well, being a lawyer and a judge is the way to go. And others might decide to be a professor and have a cushy place to hang their hat while they do their political activism thing. But the judiciary has become like that also.
Yeah, it's been insane. Well, I mean, you do see what the leader of the Democrat Party looks like right now, because apparently AOC is the legal mastermind in the other side, and they are so proud of that. She is going to be that presidential candidate and reform the entire Democrat Party. Thomas, we're out of time, my friend. Keep up this fight. We got a lot of big things going on. Hopefully they're good, and we can see some progress moving forward in the next week or so. But we appreciate what you do. Let's get you back on the show again real soon, my friend.
Okay, have a great day.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Again, Thomas D Lorenzo of the Mises Institute. Go and check those guys out and everything they're working on. Let's see this one big, beautiful bill get through. Let's see the economy start cranking, and let's see the Supreme Court maybe back off on some policy. But remember, AOC walks in there. She knows what legal's all about, right?
Don't act like you're not impressed.
Yeah, that's what we're about. We're back at it tomorrow for a Friday. Until then, be your own voice of reason. We'll see you back on the radio soon. Bye.